Cavalieri. I'm president of the Westborough Historical Society, and we're so delighted really that you've joined us this evening for this presentation. In case you're not aware, the Westborough Historical Society was founded in 1889 to preserve local history through research programs and the preservation of artifacts. And our artifacts are preserved at the Sibley House up the street at 13 Parkman Street, which is a Greek Revival 1844 home that was built by the sleigh maker, William Sibley. And inside the house we have 3 centuries of artifacts of Westborough's history, dating back to the founding of the town in 1717. So we will be opening up the house for some tours in the new year here, hopefully, certainly by the spring. And we will publicize that, and we'd love to have you come and see our collection. For more than a century, the Society's mission has been to celebrate local history and bring that history to life through monthly presentations like this one, our Sibley House tours, and special events. And I encourage you to consider liking our Facebook page, Westborough Historical Society, checking out our webpage, which is www.westboroughhistory.org. You can become a member through our webpage, and we'd love to have you join us and support our organization. Tonight, of course, we've got a presentation on famous women of Westborough through the centuries by Christina Nilsson Allen. Let me tell you a little bit about Chris. Christina Nilsson Allen's a freelance writer and author of Westborough's 1984 history, On the Beaten Path. She currently writes a local history column for the Community Advocate. Christina worked for more than 2 decades as a writer, editor, and marketer at Clark University. Christina grew up in Framingham and holds a master's degree from Clark University in 1991, with her thesis being on affordable housing in Westborough. She and her husband, Pete, in the rear there, have lived in Westborough since 1973 and have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Active in Westborough public service for nearly half a century, Chris was elected to the Select Board for 12 years and was a founding director of the Westborough Community Land Trust, as well as the 495 Metro West Corridor Partnership. Christina has been involved with the Westborough Historical Society since 1975, serving as its longtime program chair, as she does this year, and she's been president twice. As president in 1990, she helped to facilitate the purchase of 13 Parkman Street as the Society's headquarters. And currently, Chris is also a member of the Master Plan Implementation Committee, the Westborough Community Land Trust Education Committee, the Westborough Garden Club, Westborough Connects, and New England Botanical Garden Tower Hill Greeters. And I'm pleased to introduce Christina Nilsson Allen.
Well, it's delightful to see real people with real faces in a real room. And we haven't had a program live for quite a while. And to see all of you who are interested in history and to come out tonight is wonderful. So I would like to say that this program was suggested by one of our members because they said we're always doing programs about men. Famous men. What about the women in Westborough? So I said, okay. So we decided to do a program on the famous women in Westborough. What I did is I picked 5 women across the centuries that represented the best in Westborough. They are 1700s, Betsy Fay Whitney, 1800s, Annie Fales, 1900s, Esther Forbes and Bee Warburton, and the 21st century, Nikki Stone. Across the centuries, these women broke barriers to pave the way for Westborough women today. They were courageous, daring, ingenious pioneers. They refused to give up. The first person is entrepreneur Betsy Fay Whitney. Betsy was born in 1742 and lived to 1777. This is her home, on 36 Eli Whitney Street, but she was born in the home of her grandfather, Captain John Fay, and that is Wilkinson's Nursery, which you probably know, or High Hill Farm. Betsy was different from the other colonial girls because rarely would you find a young woman who dreamed of having her own business and making her own money. But Betsy Fay was one of those women. She was determined to build her dowry and decided to learn how to make straw hats. So she taught herself how to grow, cut, bundle, bleach, split, and braid rye straw that grew on her grandfather's farm, and then to actually fashion straw bonnets out of that. And that's why she is thought of as one of the first, or the first entrepreneur in colonial Westborough, because she started the straw hat business. Now, she continued on and taught other young women how to grow and braid and straw hats and make them. And when a young man, handsome young blacksmith, Eli Whitney Sr., came courting in 1762, Betsy did something that was totally unheard of. She turned him down. Didn't do that. But Betsy told Eli, well, I haven't made enough money for my dowry yet, and we'll see later on. So after 3 more years of producing straw bonnets and building her dowry, she decided she would marry Eli Whitney Sr. And in February 1765, they were married and moved into this house at 36 Eli Whitney Street, an A-frame. And 10 months later, their first son was born, Eli Whitney Jr. Betsy continued to make straw bonnets and prosper and teach others how to make straw bonnets. It became quite a fashion in Westborough. And her young son was ingenious and clever as she was. And he helped her in the business. He would fashion long hat pins because his father was a blacksmith and he had the tools. He also carved a wooden block, a hat block, to shape these hats, as you can see over there. And that wooden hat block now is in the Historical Society, and it's one of our most treasured artifacts. The block that Eli Whitney carved for his mom and her straw hat business. Straw hats continued to be an important industry in Westborough, even after Betsy died, particularly when the trains came in 1834 and brought in all kinds of exports, particularly palm leaf straw, which was new and exciting, I guess, to braid. And they would braid this palm leaf straw and produce more hats. Women began or had continued to make straw hats at home. It was a home industry for a long time. And children and women would braid straw, and there would be a straw braid price in the stores, as well as a regular price. And kids were expected to braid 10 yards a day on school days and maybe 15 yards on weekends or when they had time off to earn extra money. This continued until after the trains came and it became a big business. And eventually, in the 1880s, this was the National Straw Works, and it is the largest straw hat factory in the world, in Westborough, where Bay State Commons is. And a young woman would come and produce straw hats there. So therefore, that was the legacy that Betsy Fay Whitney began, and it became one of Westborough's most important products. there is still, unfortunately, Betsy died young. She died at age 36 in 1777. And her son Eli was only 12. But as you know, he went on to invent the cotton gin in the United States, and more important, to introduce mass assembly to the United States. And after he had made quite a bit of money, he came back to Westborough and erected this monument to his family, which has Elizabeth Fay, died in August, age 36. There's also another monument, as you probably know, and it's outside of 36 Eli Whitney Street. It is the original doorstep of Eli Whitney's house and Betsy Fay, his mother's house. So you can go up and pat it and actually not really step on it, but you too can perhaps absorb some of the Whitney genius, because I think that Eli Whitney Jr. was a type of genius. He was clever, he was a great businessman, and I think he got a lot of his drive and motivation from his role model, the first entrepreneur in Westborough, his mom, Betsy Fay. Next person, perhaps a lot of you know. Show of hands, how many people have heard of or knew Annie Fales? We have a lot of people.
Yeah, but we didn't know her. Yeah.
And she didn't die until 1972. And therefore, did anybody here have Annie Fales? I doubt it, because she retired in 1937. Unless you look better than I think you should. You did not have Annie Fales as a school teacher in 1937. She was born only 2 years after the Civil War, but she lived until 1972. Annie moved to Westborough at age 7 and lived most of her life across the street at 58 West Main Street. And people say that her home always smelled like fresh baked cookies or Boston baked beans, because she used to make a lot of things for neighbors and friends, and it was a very friendly, warm house. She also was an accomplished musician. She had a beautiful voice and went to Boston for voice lessons. She was the soloist at the Unitarian Church here, as well as the organist at the Unitarian Church. And a lot of the programs in the high school were accompanied by Annie Fales and her piano. She came to Westborough, as I said, she had 50 years as a teacher here, and she graduated from the class of 1885. She got her teacher's credentials from Worcester Normal School in 1889, also now as Worcester State, right? And she came back to Westborough. She taught a little while in Upton and then came back to Westborough in 1892. And at that point, Westborough had one-room schoolhouses, 8 districts of one-room schoolhouses. And Annie taught in district number 8, which was the schoolhouse out near Lake Chauncey. And what I love about this is her class, is how they got dressed up. Annie's way up at the top, right? Up on the left. And to look at the lace collars on the boys in the front. I doubt if they usually wore lace collars to school, but this was when they were going to have their picture taken. And it was just fun to see the faces and the costumes and the kids that Annie had. In 1902, the Eli Whitney Elementary School was built, and Annie became its principal. And she continued as principal until she retired in 1937. How many of you went to Eli Whitney Grammar School? Okay, least 3 of you, 4 of you, 5 of you, for elementary school, right? So that was, Annie was its first principal. Yesterday was the open house for the new Fales School. But the first Fales School was named for Annie in 1963. And that's the one my kids went to. Any of you or your children go to the old Fales School, 1963? And the new Fales School was built in 2021, and I guess it's incredible as far as environmentally progressive and just amazing. So I think Annie would be blown away to see from her one-room schoolhouse to the new Fales School. And I think it's a fitting tribute. Over her lifetime of 104 years, Annie touched the lives of more than 1,000 students. And at 95, she's quoted as saying, "Patience, a sense of humor, and a real love of children. That's what makes a good teacher." So I hope all of you teachers in the audience take that. It was good in 1872 when I was 2. It's good in 2022. Our next person brings us into the 20th century. She's the Pulitzer Prize winner, Esther Louise Forbes. Forbes being a pretty well-known name in Westborough. Esther was born here, on the street right up here, 39 Church Street, in the home of her mother, who was a very good historian, Harriet Merrifield Forbes, from the Merrifield family in Worcester, and her father, Judge Trowbridge Forbes. Now, Esther loved reading and literature and writing. She went to Bancroft Academy, and in 1912 actually graduated from Bancroft Academy and went on to study at Bradford Academy, if you know of Bradford, and it was a junior college kind of in Haverhill, and that's where she graduated from in 1912. Before then, she went to the Bancroft School in Worcester. She loved writing stories, and one of her first stories was called Breakneck Hill in 1915. And that story, her first story, won the O. Henry Award as one of the best 10 stories published that year. So she started off pretty well. She went on to write 8 historical novels, 1 major biography, and again, short stories. Her first novel, which in 1926, was called Oh Genteel Lady, and that was selected as a Book of the Month Club selection, and the Book of the Month Club, I understand, had just begun, and hers was one of the first books they selected. Another book, novel that she wrote in 1928, was called A Mirror for Witches, and one which I think would be very apropos now, because it's about a young woman's life that was destroyed by prejudice, hatred, superstition during the Salem witch trials. And it was very popular when it was written, but it also was made into a ballet and an opera in 1976, and that it was called Dilby, D-I-L-B-Y, Dilby's Doll. So her writings were really well recognized and appreciated in many different ways. However, she probably is best known as a historical writer, and she and her mother Harriet were a team. they eventually moved to Worcester. And Harriet Merrifield Forbes was a fine historian, and I'm sure you've read some of her books. She did a lot of research at the American Antiquarian Society. And in 1889, she wrote The History of Westborough, the 100th Town. Nice little book called The 100th Town. You can still hopefully get it out of the library. She also did something that was very important, which was to edit the Ebenezer Parkman diaries, also through the help of the American Antiquarian Society. And according to Tony, Westborough is one of the best documented towns, colonial towns in the country, because of the journal and the diary of Reverend Ebenezer Parkman. And Harriet Merrifield Forbes is the one who edited them and made sure that we have them now. She also was fascinated by Puritan gravestones, probably because she was wandering around our memorial cemetery, and wrote a major book on Puritan gravestones and the men who carved them. She and her daughter, though, worked as a team, and Harriet did a lot of the research, colonial research, at the American Antiquarian Society. And if you're not familiar with that, you can go visit the American Antiquarian Society, and it has supposedly all manuscripts before 1900, or the major manuscripts before 1900. And there are open houses, or you can do research there as well. So she and her daughter did their research, and with the research that Harriet did on Paul Revere, her daughter Esther wrote the definitive biography on Paul Revere and the world he lived in. It was so good that it won the Pulitzer Prize for History in 1943. But the next year, probably even more famous in our circles anyway, is the novel Johnny Tremain. Esther Forbes wrote Johnny Tremain as a young adult fiction. It's set during the American Revolution, about a young apprentice to a silversmith who witnesses the American Revolution, the battles of Lexington and Concord, the hatred between the Tories and the Patriots, and it's a very interesting book even now. And I know it's a classic. How many of you had to read it? I had to read it. My kids had to read it. And I hope now our kids here read it, because it is truly a classic, and it has reached the heights because it was made into a Walt Disney movie. So it had it made. But it's a very fine book, and probably what Esther is known for as much as anything, although she and her mother were both fine historians. Esther was the first woman elected to the American Antiquarian Society, which was a big deal. And she also became a fellow of the American Arts and Sciences.
Huh.
Next person you probably know. How many of you knew Bee Warburton? Garden Club people did. Bee, I love her name. As a person couldn't be named better, because her nickname was B-E-E, and she did pollinate and hybridize flowers. And I don't know which came first, her name or her career, but Bee Warburton. I interviewed her for On the Beaten Path and in 1983, and she was charming, a wonderful lady. And this is the way she was in 1983. She lived on Warburton Lane, which makes sense. It used to be East Main Street. They moved to East Main Street, and that became Warburton Lane, next to Yeoman's and where Mugford's is now. And in her garden out front, it's only a quarter of an acre, she grew 4,000 irises with their parents and seedlings. and she introduced more than 100 new varieties of iris to the world. Bee had an interesting background. She grew up in Brighton and went to Barnard College in New York, majoring in chemistry and intending to becoming a doctor. However, tragedy struck in her sophomore year, and her father died unexpectedly. Bee had to drop out of college and go to work to help support her 6 siblings. But she never lost that love of learning, research, conducting experiments, and writing up her findings. It was always in her to do this type of scientific discovery. She eventually married Frank Warburton, who was an MIT graduate, and they came back to Westborough in 1948 and moved into their home, which was the farmhouse where Monkford's is now, and where their father had a chicken farm. Anybody remember the Warburton's farm or chicken farm or anything? That may have been before you all. But they lived there and had a good farm, I guess great corn. And Bee decided that she wanted to have a rock garden. And she began to look at iris because they supposedly weren't that hard to grow. And she wanted a particular kind of dwarf iris. And she couldn't find it anywhere. So she never gave up. She said, okay, I can't find the iris I want. Her scientific training kicked in, and she said, I am going to invent it. I am going to hybridize the iris I want. So she became expert at iris genetics and taking tweezers and a magnifying glass and pollen and being able to transfer the pollen from one particular breed of iris, this one would be dwarf, to another. And it took, I guess, 2 years of cultivating them, recording each seed with its genetic size, color, and everything. Again, transplanting them into rows with their labels, recording the results after the 2 years when these blossoms became, and their time and their photo. And when they met her standards, she would register the new varieties with the American Iris Society. And as I said, in 1957, after 9 years of experimenting, finally she got a dwarf iris that met her standards. And it was called Brassy, and it was a yellow iris. And then later on followed this dark blue denim. And she kind of specialized in blue purple, some of them almost black. And she continued, as I said, to over 38 years to create 100 varieties of iris that are all over the world. She was recognized, she got many awards, 7 times the medal for American Hybridizer from the American Iris Society. And her granddaughter, who was Vicki Flanagan, who lives in Peaks Island, Maine, sent to the Westborough Garden Club this year for our 90th birthday, Bee Warburton irises. And she said that probably most of the dwarf irises in the world contain DNA from Bee Warburton's irises. And this is she. She was famous for introducing these irises, but also for writing about them and writing about iris genetics and hybridizing. She wrote articles, international magazines and in the New York Times, and her editing of The World of Irises is the Bible of growing irises, and it's now in the 3rd printing. The greenhouse at Westborough High School is named for Bee Warburton. And what I like about her is that she did not profit from her irises. She gave them away. So when I went to interview her, I came home with irises. And other people did too. And what is so great about the fact the Garden Club has Bee Warburton irises this year is that I think we're going to be planting them around town. So in May, you watch for beautiful colors of irises all around town and know they are legacies from Bee Warburton. Last is a contemporary. The Olympic gold champion, Nikki Stone, who was born in 1971. How many of you knew Nikki? How many of you were here during her parade? No, okay. I knew Nikki as well because Nikki was a classmate of my son Rick's, so I knew Nikki when she was a little girl. And I will never forget that when Rick was about in the 4th grade, he came home and he was really ticked off. He was pouting and it was like, so what's the matter, Rick? A girl beat me in gymnastics. He was really teed off. And it turned out it was Nikki Stone. And when he later found out that she won the Olympic gold, he was a little bit mollified. And they're good friends. But Nikki was quite amazing. Nikki always loved gymnastics. And as a little girl, she saw at age 5, was it Nadia Comaneci? Yeah. In 1976, won a gold medal, I think for gymnastics. And little Nikki said, I'm going to win a gold medal at the Olympics someday. And she did. She loved being airborne, she told me. And she would practice jumping off of a balcony, turning somersaults, and landing on a mattress. That was her fun. So she was enjoying skiing as well. So what she did is, when she was about 18, she saw the first time aerial skiing. And it was a perfect combination of skiing and aerobics. And gymnastics, thank you. And she said, that's going to be my sport. So she began to study. She graduated from Westborough High in 1989, went to Union College in New York, and when she graduated from there, went out to Utah, to the University of Utah, and summa cum laude, graduated in sports psychology. And then in 1994, I began training at Park City, Utah for the Olympics. And sure enough, 4 years later, Nikki performed this aerial, here she is, this is the one perhaps that she won with. She's executing a perfect triple single twisting somersault to win the 1998 Olympic gold medal. And from 1995 on, for her aerial skiing, she won 35 World Cup medals, 11 World Cup titles, 2 aerial World Cup titles, 4 national aerial skiing titles. So she was the first aerial skier to win overall freestyle World Cup, and she was inducted into the National Ski Hall of Fame in the year 2003. This is what happens when you start an aerial jump. And you can try. Just ski down a snow jump, I guess, at 40 miles an hour. Then you propel yourself up with several somersaults at least 50 feet or 4 stories high. And then you land at a 45-degree angle hill. And that's what she did. And I guess she can do triple somersaults, single somersaults, or whatever she did it perfectly to win the gold. And this is her poster. She was the first American to win the gold Olympic medal in inverted aerial skiing. because she won the gold, and that didn't happen very often in Westborough, we had a big party for her. It was Nikki Stone Day, March 21st, 1998. There was a big parade. Some of you, I hope, were there. And Nikki presented us with the American flag, which she carried in the Olympics on the parade out as one of the Olympic champions. So I'm hoping we can find that flag and fly it, because it's a very special American flag for Westborough. And she's presented it to me because I was lucky enough to be a selectman in those days. Now, Nikki continues to be a motivational speaker all over the world and country. She wrote a book, When Turtles Fly, about taking risks and defeating adversity. And her story is that in 1994, after many World Cup championships, she suffered an inoperable back injury. And 10 doctors told her she would never ski again. But Nikki refused to say no or to give up. She went to Park City, and for the next 4 years of rehab and training, she trained in inverted aerial skiing. And 4 years later, she won the Olympic gold. So therefore, she gives a talk about don't give up, take a risk, and decided there were a lot of parallels in business and in sports that she could draw upon when she gives her speeches. This is a display case. If you've been into Westborough High, you can see this display case of Nikki's Olympic paraphernalia, vests, and medals, and it's to really inspire the students today that they too can defeat adversity or stick to it and become a champ, no matter what. So, from business to athletics, from science to the arts, these women pioneers have been role models for Westborough women today. And I think we are very lucky to have women like these women, but the women out here, who are leaders in our government, schools, libraries. We have many fine Westborough women who are equally courageous and are great entrepreneurs, as well as role models. So, thank you.
I have the picture. Michael was a friend of, our son Michael was a friend of Nikki's. And I think this picture says the parade probably.
Yeah. She comes back to Westborough once in a while.
Oh, does she?
Yeah, and I interviewed her last time, and she still is doing motivational speaking.
Is she still in Park City?
Yes. And also, I think in Virginia too, because her husband travels around. And so. Yes.
Chris, going back to contestant number one,
Betsy Fay.
Mrs. Whitney. You said that the hat factory, the famous hat factory, is where Bay State.
You know where Bay State Abrasives was?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's where the hat factory was.
But there was a hat
burned down.
factory where the fire department is.
Yeah, there were other hat factories.
That was a different one then.
Yeah.
Okay.
The biggest one, which
Was-
was National
okay.
Straw Works, was the first factory before Bay State went to Bay
Okay.
Abrasives and come down. Anybody else have questions?
Okay.
Thank you. Marilyn had a question.
Okay, Marilyn.
I was going to say, my grandparents, or great-grandparents, lived here in Westborough on 2 Oak Street, which isn't even 2 Oak Street anymore. And they had a straw factory, and they made the suitcases, like my father's 1915 Oldsmobile. Put it on the running board, there's metal around it, your suitcase. But that was my great-grandparents had that. In fact, I think you mentioned it in your book. because it was right next door to the Fishers.
Yeah. There were a lot of industry going on in Westborough. It was kind of fun. It wasn't a sleepy little town in 1834, 35. The train came and boom! We had factories all over the place, people manufacturing things, and clever women at home manufacturing things as well, putting their kids to work. So what I'm hoping is that all of you will come out to other Westborough historical programs. We have them once a month.
Yep, I can say what our next program is.
Okay.
Our next program is actually going to be on Zoom. It's going to be February 6th, 7 p.m. on Zoom. That's a Monday. We're going to look at who was Dr. Solomon Carter Fuller, the doctor that at Westborough State Hospital that the entry road is now named for. He was the first black psychiatrist in the United States, and he studied under Dr. Alzheimer of Alzheimer's disease. So he actually has a very illustrious history. And that presentation is going to be done by a Boston University School of Medicine psychiatry professor, Dr. Edith Jolin. And I believe that program is going to be co-sponsored by the Civic Club. So that's going to be Monday, February 6th, 7 p.m. on Zoom. We do have some handouts if they're still left at the back of the room, and we've been circulating a little, we do have some handouts, including our brochure, and then somewhere around here is a little sign-up sheet we've been passing around to find out who's here.
How would you get the Zoom link?
It's going to be publicized, so that program will be publicized probably in the next couple weeks, next week or whatever. And I usually publicize on our Facebook page, Westborough Historical Society, on the patch. There should be a patch link to that, and perhaps some other town.
If you signed up on this list, we'll send you an email.
Right. Okay. So you can sign our sheet that's going around. So, and thank you thank you for coming. This has really been a full house. And
Great to see so many.
yeah.
We know.